Sir, please step back. We got this.
The man in the $400 hiking pants was bleeding out on the trail, and the man with the answer was the one they had just told to step back. Hal Whitaker was 92 years old. Brown corduroy shirt that had seen 4 presidents. A worn leather leash in his hand connecting to a slow golden shepherd named Bishop. He had stopped on the switchback because he heard screaming, and when he came around the bend he saw the bleeding man, the panicked friends, and the $3,200 trauma kit spread out on the dirt like an exploded suitcase. He knelt down beside the wounded man without saying a word. The one with the trimmed beard and the Garmin watch looked up at him. "Sir, please, we've got this. Step back. We've got him." Hal looked at the wound. He looked at the unopened tourniquet still sealed in its factory plastic. He looked at the man going grey on the ground. He did not step back. If you have ever watched well-meaning people freeze when it mattered most, if you have ever known an old veteran whose hands knew what to do while everyone else's hands knew nothing, type DOC in the comments. That is what infantry called their combat medics. It is what they called Harold Whitaker in the snow outside Hagarari in December of 1950, and it is what one of those weekend hikers was about to be calling him in roughly 90 seconds. The wounded man was named Garrett Pierce, 44 years old, marketing executive out of Denver, lead organizer of the Saturday hiking group that had named itself, half-jokingly, the Trail Brokers. He had caught the jagged end of a broken hemlock branch in his right thigh on a steep, scree-covered descent. The branch had punched in deep and torn back out, opening the femoral artery on the way. He was lying on his side in the dirt with bright red blood pulsing, not running, across the pine needles, and his 4 friends were on their knees around him with the most expensive backcountry trauma kit Black Diamond and North American Rescue sold between them. And not one of them remembered which pouch held the tourniquet. Hal had come up the mountain alone, the way he had come up this mountain more or less every Saturday for 31 years. He drove out from Bend in his old Ford pickup before sunrise, parked at the south lot and let Bishop set the pace. The dog was 12, Hal was 92. Neither of them moved fast anymore, and neither of them needed to. They had nowhere to be. He had buried his wife Eleanor in the spring of 2019, and after that the hiking had become less of a hobby and more of a ritual. Eleanor had been a school nurse for 41 years. She used to say that the two of them had spent their entire marriage in the business of keeping people from dying who didn't yet know how close they had come to it. She would have liked the way Hal handled that Saturday on the trail. She would not have liked the way it started. He had heard them before he saw them. Voices high and chopped. The particular cadence of panic. The one Hal hadn't heard in earnest since a kid in his ambulance crew screamed for help during a multi-car wreck on Highway 20 in 1987. He moved as fast as a man his age could move, which was not very fast at all, but he closed the last 100 yards of trail at a pace that surprised even him. When he came around the bend, he saw the kit first, spread out like an explosion, foil-wrapped chest seals, a cat tourniquet still sealed in its factory plastic, hemostatic gauze in an unopened package, trauma shears in a pouch with the Velcro still closed. Then he saw the man on the ground and he saw the blood. It was an arterial bleed. He knew it before he was within 20 feet. There was no mistaking the way the blood was moving. That pulse, that bright oxygenated red, that rhythm matched to a heart. He had seen it in the snow at Chosin. He had seen it on the median strip of a Texas interstate in 1972. He had seen it 3 times in Vietnam, including once on his own forearm. He knew, the way old medics know, that they had maybe 2 minutes before this man's pressure dropped too low for a tourniquet to do any good. He dropped Bishop's leash. The dog sat without being told. "Move," Hal said quietly. Tyler, the one with the trimmed beard, looked up at him. "Sir, please, we've got him." "You don't have anything," Hal said, already on his knees beside Garrett. "Press here, both hands, don't let go." He guided Tyler's palms to the high inside of Garrett's thigh, just below the groin, and pressed them down into the femoral pressure point. He felt Tyler resist for a quarter of a second, the resistance of a man who is used to being in charge of his Saturdays, and then yield, because Hal's voice carried a weight Tyler had never heard in person before. It was the voice of someone who had done this when it counted. Garrett's eyes were open and unfocused. His skin had gone the colour of skim milk. His lips were faintly blue. Maya, the woman who had been calling 911, was kneeling with her phone pressed to her ear, and Hal could hear the dispatcher's voice tinny and small, asking about the patient's condition. Maya could not answer because she did not have the language to answer. Tell her arterial bleed, right femoral, conscious but altered, 2 miles up Trail 7 from the south lot, Hal said without looking at her. Tell her we need rotary wing, not ground. Maya stared at him for a second. Then she repeated his words into the phone, almost exactly, like a child taking dictation. The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. Hal could hear it through the phone, the shift from talking them down to issuing the call. He turned to the kit. He looked for the cat tourniquet and found it on the third pouch. It was still inside its hermetically sealed plastic wrapper. The wrapper was the kind that needed scissors or a tear notch, and the tear notch was on the bottom edge, which was the edge none of them had thought to look for. He could have torn it open with his teeth in 5 seconds. He had 30 years on these people in tooth strength alone, but he did not have 5 seconds to spare for tooth work, and he had something faster. He sat back on his heels, reached down to his right boot, and pulled the lace out in one long, practiced pull. 84 inches of black braided nylon. He had bought the boots in 2019. He had laced them himself that morning, the same way he had laced his combat boots in February of 1951, on a cold tin floor in a field hospital in Korea. Stick, Hal said. Find me one. Thumb thick, 8 inches, strong. Donna, the youngest of the group, 26, who had been the quietest the whole hike, moved first. He scrambled 3 feet off the trail and came back with a broken piece of vine maple, dry, about the right diameter. He held it out like an offering. Hal nodded once. He looped the bootlace around Garrett's thigh, 3 inches above the wound, on the side closer to the heart. He pulled it tight by hand, threaded the stick through, and began to twist. The lace bit deep into the skin. Garrett moaned and tried to move. Tyler kept the pressure where Hal had put his hands. Hal twisted the stick a full turn, then another, then another. He was watching the wound and only the wound. The pulsing slowed. He twisted one more turn. The pulsing stopped. Knot it, he said. Tyler, don't move your hands. Maya, you. Take this loose end and tie it around the stick so it can't unwind. Around and through and around again. Don't pull on the windlass, just immobilize it. Maya's hands shook for the first knot and steadied for the second. The lace held. Hal noted the time on his old Timex. 3:41 in the afternoon. He would tell the flight crew. They needed to know when the tourniquet went on. Tourniquet time was a thing he had been tracking since before any of these people had been born. The bleeding had stopped. Garrett was still pale, still on the edge, but he was no longer leaking out his life onto the dirt. Hal pulled a roll of hemostatic gauze out of the open kit, tore the packaging with his teeth on the second try, and packed the wound carefully, pressing the gauze deep with 2 fingers. Then he asked for a chest seal, not for the chest, but because the adhesive backing made a passable improvised pressure bandage over the packed wound. Tyler watched him work with an expression Hal recognized. It was the expression of a man learning in real time that the gear in his pack was not the same thing as the skill to use it. You had everything you needed, Hal said quietly as he worked. You had a CAT tourniquet. You had hemostatic gauze. You had pressure dressings. Whoever sold you this kit knew what they were doing. He glanced up at Tyler. Did any of you ever take a class, even the free one? Stop the bleed, 2 hours. Red Cross runs them every month. Tyler did not answer. His face was wet. Hal did not know if it was sweat or tears, and he did not ask. Gear without training is just weight, Hal said. He went back to the wound. My wife told me the same thing every time she came home with another new kit for the school nurses station. She'd put on a class the same week. Every time. She used to say a bandage in a drawer never saved anybody. Dana, the young one, was sitting on the ground with his palms flat against the trail, breathing the way people breathe when they have just stopped being scared and have started being something else. He looked at Hal. Where did you learn this? Dana said. It was not really a question. It was the start of one. Long story, Hal said. Helicopters coming. They heard it before they saw it. The flat, slapping thrum of rotor wash, miles out, getting louder. By the time the medevac came over the ridge and circled looking for the clearing, Hal had Garrett on his side in the recovery position, the wound packed, the tourniquet secure, the time written in black Sharpie on Garrett's forehead, TQ1541, and a foil emergency blanket wrapped around his torso to slow the shock. The bird set down in the meadow 40 yards up the trail. 2 flight medics came out at a jog, gear bags swinging. The lead one was a woman in her early 30s, short black hair, navy flight suit, an airlink patch on her shoulder. She had the easy, efficient stride of someone who did this work 20 times a month. She knelt down opposite Hal, gave the wound a 30-second assessment, glanced at the writing on Garrett's forehead, glanced at the bootlace tourniquet, glanced at the vine maple windlass, and then she looked up at Hal's face. She stopped moving. For a second she just looked at him. Hal looked back. He had not seen her before. She had not seen him before. But her hands had gone still on the patient, and her partner, sensing the pause, looked over. "Sir," she said, "can I ask your name?" "Hal Whitaker." She closed her eyes, just for a beat. Then she opened them and she nodded, once, like a person confirming something to herself. She turned to her partner. "This is Master Sergeant Harold Whitaker, U.S. Army, Medical." Her partner did not understand. He glanced between them. "Hagaruri," she said. Her voice was even now, the way medics' voices get even when the moment is bigger than the moment. "Improvised femoral tourniquet, bootlace and bayonet windlass, December of 1950. Patient survived the breakout, made it to Hungnam, made it home." She looked at Hal again. "I did my 68 whiskey training at Fort Sam Houston in 2008. Day 1 of hemorrhage control, before they let us touch a single piece of modern gear, they sat us down and they walked us through that case study. They wanted us to understand what a medic could do with nothing, sir." She paused. "We trained on you." Tyler had stopped moving. Maya was holding her phone at her side, the screen dark. Dana was sitting up straight in the dirt, watching, not blinking. Hal cleared his throat. "Marine Corporal," he said. "Name was Dawes, James Dawes, 21 years old. Took shrapnel through the high thigh from a mortar round outside the perimeter. They brought him in around 0300. We had nothing. The kit was frozen solid. Morphine syrettes were ice. I pulled my lace because I had nothing else." He paused. He was looking at the ground, at Bishop, who was lying down now with his chin on his paws. "He told me before they evacuated him out that he had a baby girl back in Pennsylvania he hadn't met, born in October. I always wondered if he made it home in time to meet her." The flight medic was very still. "He did," she said. "He died in 2009, 80 years old. He had 4 children and 11 grandchildren. The youngest grandson is named James Harold Dawes." She paused. "The Harold is for you, sir. They tell that part in the case study, too." Hal did not say anything. He looked at Bishop. Bishop looked back at him. After a moment, Hal nodded. Once, very small. The kind of nod a man makes to himself when something inside him that has been waiting 75 years finally gets the answer it was waiting for. They loaded Garrett into the helicopter. He was conscious. He was going to make it. The flight medic squeezed Hal's shoulder before she climbed in, and her partner came over and shook his hand, the careful, firm handshake of one medic to another across 2 generations. Tyler tried to say something to Hal and could not get the words out. Maya was crying quietly. Dinah shook Hal's hand and held it longer than a handshake usually lasts. The bird lifted off. The rotor wash flattened the grass and stung Hal's face with grit. The way it had stung his face in Korea 75 years ago, the way it had stung in helicopters all through Vietnam, the way it had stung in countless training fields in between. He stood there until the helicopter was a black dot over the ridge. Then he sat down on a log and waited for his hands to stop shaking. Bishop came and lay down across his boots, the way Bishop always did. After a few minutes, Hal stood up, picked the bootlace up off the trail where it had fallen during the loading, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart. He laced his boot the rest of the way down with the spare paracord he had been carrying in his pack for 41 years. He had a feeling Eleanor was somewhere watching, smiling, telling him he should have replaced that spare a decade ago. He smiled back at her. He walked Bishop down the mountain. 6 weeks later, Garrett Pierce, walking with a cane but walking, drove from Denver to Bend with his wife and his 2 children, and knocked on the door of an old man he had never properly met. He brought a card his 8-year-old daughter had made in crayon. The card said, "Thank you for saving my daddy," in uneven capital letters with a heart on the side. Hal put the card on the mantel next to Eleanor's photograph. It is still there. Tyler quit his marketing job in November and enrolled in a wilderness EMT program in Bend. He keeps a C-AT tourniquet on his pack now, outside the kit, in a quick-access pouch, factory packaging already opened, exactly the way Hal would have. Dana started teaching free stop-the-bleed classes at his university every other Saturday morning. He tells the bootlace story at the end of every class. Maya now hikes with a fanny pack that holds one tourniquet, one roll of gauze, and a pair of trauma shears, and she knows how to use them in 40 seconds, blindfolded, because she practices in her living room twice a week. The black braided bootlace is back in Hal's right boot. He threaded it through the eyelets the morning after Garrett's family visited, and he has not taken it out since. He intends to die with that lace in that boot. Bishop, who is now 13.5, walks slower than he used to, and so does Hal, but they still go up the mountain on Saturdays. They have nowhere to be. If you believe that the men and women who learned how to save lives in places we will never have to visit deserve more than our forgetting, type DOC in the comments. Subscribe to honour the medics, the corpsmen, the docs of every war and every generation who carried the wounded out of the dark and never asked to be remembered for it. They never asked. They never expected. But on a quiet trail in the Cascades, on a Saturday afternoon in late summer, a 92-year-old man with a bootlace and a stick and 75 years of knowing exactly what to do reminded 4 strangers, and reminded all of us, that the most expensive gear in the world is no substitute for the cheapest thing of all. Someone who has been there before and remembers how.